Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabados of Delmar, together with my co-host Mark Gronich of Statewide News Service and jbiztechvalley.com. We have a very, very special guest. I wouldn't even call it a guest. I'll say a good friend over here, former New York Assemblyman Jack McEneny. Jack, can I call you first name? We're good friends.
Sure.
Jack, welcome to the Jewish View.
It's good to be here.
We've known each other for so many years. You introduced me onto the New York State Assembly floor, and of course with Rabbi Rubin and
a lot of children that are grown-up adults now that used to come down with the school.
Make you an honorary part of the Jewish community. Well, you are part of it.
The mishpucha, as we say. So, Jackie retired from the Assembly after 20 years, and you had like 40 plus years of public service.
47 years.
47. You worked in the Corning administration. And then you worked. You were elected to the county legislature.
That was in a write-in election.
Yeah, but you didn't stay long there.
No, just they shortened the term to 1 year, which worked out fine because Dick Connors, my predecessor, also a very good friend of the Jewish community. Dick Connors was ill and couldn't run again. He was the oldest member of the Assembly at the time.
Right.
There was a four-way primary, and I got through the primary, and the rest was history, and stayed there ever since.
Now, there was one of your elections that resulted in a tie.
Well, that was the first time I ran for office. I was a deputy county executive at the time, and that administration was ending. But prior to that, that was clear. I declared for the county legislature for an area that would be very familiar to many of your viewers up in the then 14th Ward. And that wound up as a tie, and there was much controversy for a very long time. Those days, you counted the votes as they came in the mail every single day, and it was like Noah's Ark, one of each. They'd be coming in pairs, and finally.
And who was that? Who did you tie with?
It was Richie Myers.
Okay.
And he was an 18-year incumbent, and he was the majority leader. And I can say that everybody endorsed him, and with the exception of Dick Connors, I think very few people, at least with political titles, endorsed me. It was an interesting campaign.
So how did you overcome, for those who want to maybe unseat Frank Comissa as the majority leader, what did you do?
With volunteers. With volunteers. We never used a postage stamp once. We kept recycling the same literature because we couldn't afford to print new versions of it. And there was a lot of press, a lot of speculation. It was the same year that Bob Lyman ran to succeed Jim Coyne and was opposed by Michael Hoblock, who wound up winning. And it was not a great year for the Democrats. And I took on my own party. We had a disagreement, internal backroom disagreement. I hated the redistricting they had done, and they wanted me to endorse it because that's a field that I'm well known in. And I refused. One thing led to another, and I figured, you know what? Guess who lives in my district? And so we did literally a sneak attack. In those days, now election laws changed a lot, but in those days, in order to get a signature, you had to not only be an enrolled Democrat, because it's a Democratic primary, but you had to live in the district. So you had a very small pool of people. And I think I got 26 of them. I had more volunteers than that, but only 26 lived in the district. So we started at 7 o'clock in the morning petitioning and got the joggers and the people waiting for the bus. And then I avoided the press all day long to try and keep the press down until I had enough signatures that I knew they couldn't knock me off. And I actually got 500 signatures in one day.
Wow.
There were only 4,000 voters potentially of all parties. So that was tremendous. You only needed like 175.
And then you said there was the write-in campaign.
Well, what happened is it was a campaign that was very spirited, and I didn't think the opposition would work that hard. They worked every night with all the committeemen going door to door in the district over and over again. And I misjudged that. But we did the same thing, going door to door. By the way, we never campaigned. For Jewish listeners will appreciate this. I would not allow them to go out from sundown to sundown.
On Friday night to Saturday
It
night?
was a very Jewish neighborhood.
Yeah.
And
So
that was it. So there was one area which was overwhelmingly Italian. If somebody had come over on a Saturday, I said, well, you can distribute literature there, but stay out of all the other districts.
It was very respectful of you. Very
Well,
nice.
it was interesting, and most of the people working for me were not Jewish, and we had to do petitioning.
Well, you have many children. How many children do you have?
I have
Four.
4 children, and all 4 of them worked on the campaign.
And they all had friends who may have helped.
Some of the college kids were, for the 2 older ones, that was helpful.
So where did you get all the other volunteers for
I
people
had-
who
I had
were...
worked- I had so many contacts over the year. I ran the CETA program for 11 and a half years for Mayor Corning.
Now, CETA,
CETA was the comprehensive employment.
CETA.
Yeah, and at one point, my payrolls for the city and county combined as a city commissioner were just in 1 week in the summer, 3,300 people. So a lot of people knew me, and then I wrote the book on Albany. It was the first Albany book that had been around since 1936. I wrote that, came out in the fall of '81. So I had a lot of name recognition, and of course I'd been the deputy commissioner in the later days of Jim Coyne's campaign when there was a lot of publicity, not all of it very positive.
Right.
But people knew who I was.
And you live near Jim Coyne now. You
I
don't
do.
live too far.
He lives, he's still a good friend because I met him when I was 14 when we were freshmen in high school at CBA. He lives 3 blocks away from me, and I drop in and see him.
I see him mowing his lawn. And
Yes. He's always been like that. He's always been a great gardener, always personally attended to. When he lived in Loudonville and when he lives in Albany.
You know, you've been around for so long. Maybe compare and contrast to Albany since when you were younger, or even 20 years when you go to Assembly. Better, worse, bigger, smaller.
Well, the reason people like cities in particular is they're fascinating places to work, and they're going downhill and uphill at the same time. So we can talk about all kinds of positive things that have happened, changes that are very futuristic, whether it's nanotechnology or historic preservation or something. And at the same time, we can talk about situations which are horrible compared to the way they were when I was a boy in the 50s and the 60s. I got out of high school in 1961, to put it into perspective. And so the gangs and the guns and the violence, the breakup of families that wasn't common in the 50s and early 60s. So at the same time, this community, which has so many positive things and so many great opportunities, at the same time has some really shameful situations that are very difficult.
Where'd you go to high school?
Well, I went to Vincentian grade school, and then
VI.
there were only 3 of us that had the courage to not go to VI high school, and we went over to Christian Brothers Academy, CBA.
I see.
And,
So who were some of your famous classmates?
Oh, that was a very prominent class. Nick Crashone, who just passed away, became a judge out in the town of Colony.
Right.
And Jim Coyne became the county executive. And I think many of us were prominent in different ways, and everything from fundraising to business to prominent attorneys, physicians, and so on. I mean, that was also different, the way I was educated. In my grade school, we had 55 kids to a class.
Really? In
And-
one class?
Oh, in one
Yeah,
class?
sure.
and
Never
we'd have-
even
In Brooklyn,
heard of that.
too.
Why, really?
Oh,
I never
yeah.
had that. I had 32 or something.
Well,
at the most.
one year we had 48. We thought we were in prep school. But the tuition at Vincentian grade school was $10 a year per family.
I see.
And CBA, a boys' day military school, sounds very elite. And you look at those days, the tuition was $200 a year.
Wow.
Yeah,
It's
so
gone up since then.
Well,
a different world. I mean,
Yeah.
it was a much
Yeah.
more religious world.
right.
And basically the way it was done, I suppose in some ways you were teaching wholesale in the sense that you had large classes, but the key was you had volunteer teachers.
What's
They
the
were religious.
What's the most surprising or outstanding piece of Albany history that sticks with you or that jumps out at you?
it's like, which one of your children
I
do you
know.
like the best? You know, it's
So I'll give you 4.
they all have. Well, I think the uniqueness of the city, its sense of neighborhood, the hills and hollows, and that's something warm and personal. All the stories that come out that are individual, the difference of ethnicity. And since we're on a program giving the Jewish view, one of the peculiarities of the city is the downtown is some mud flats and then hills and hollows and deep ravines. So downtown people will say they're from Arbor Hill or Sheridan Hollow or the South End or Second Avenue Hill or Dutch Hollow, which means Deutsch or German. And but when you got to the top, then the sand plains start coming in, and it's very flat, and it's hard to say what neighborhood you're in. So up until very recently, you would go to a real estate ad, and it would say St. Teresa's Parish, St. Catherine's Parish, St. Vincent's Parish. And everybody, regardless of their religion, knew exactly, oh, that meant that part of Pine Hills, the other one meant off. And I could always imagine some poor, devout Jewish family, the mother calls up and says, how are you doing? Oh, she's this lovely. We found the loveliest flat in St. Teresa's Parish. I knew it. I knew this would happen if they moved upstate. But, you know, you would see things literally described by parishes because the parishes had real boundaries before the church.
I was very impressed that they actually named neighborhoods, you know, in Whitehall neighborhood or Elderberg and Scotland Avenue area, whatever, and Eagle Point or whatever, because it gave more definition. I grew up in Brooklyn, so you had them called neighborhoods at the time. Yeah. And so you knew what neighborhood you were in. Yeah. But
my son, the oldest boy, 3 of them are here in the city. The oldest boy teaches school, and he's a playwright and has his own theater company down on Park Slope in Brooklyn. And Brooklyn is very neighborhood oriented, still is. One of my last functions for the Assembly and Shelley Silver was drawing the boundaries of the Assembly districts. I was the co-chair of the despised redistricting commission, and neighborhoods meant so much to everybody.
Well, I remember, you know, helping with drawing the lines in Albany County in 2000, 2003, whatever, and people even here, I mean, I don't want that block.
That's right.
I want this block. Yes. I mean, it went down to the blocks.
That's not part of our neighborhood.
You know, I don't like, there were 3 people on there I don't like, and I got 5 people here I like, so I want this block, you know. Every vote counts. Even though they would win in Albany County, you always won by large numbers.
It goes beyond that.
Yeah.
If you're looking for a district of, let's say, 7,500 people, and you've got the federal government and the courts, everybody's looking at you, and you have this wonderful district of 8,500 people, then your obligation is to throw 1,500 people out if you want to have a neighborhood-based district.
Right.
And a lot of it is less political and more personal. Just, you know, that's my shopping street, my people see me there all the time, et cetera.
That's true, too. That's another way, yeah.
This is where I go to worship. This is where my school was. Oh, yeah. This is very, very important to me. Well, and it's more emotional than political.
Well, this go around, I heard so much about Blessed Sacrament on Central Avenue, where one guy said, oh, no, don't redistrict this guy out of that. He goes to that church, and, oh, how could you do this? He's going to lose votes. People win in Albany. You're dubbed a Democrat. You win. I mean, it's like there's no races.
And you know, and you look at the numbers and say, it's going to be Democrat no matter what you do. And there's other areas where it's going to be Republican regardless. Why are they fighting? Because they're not just thinking politically.
No, they're not.
They're thinking emotionally.
That's right.
You know, this is my core. This is where I go and pick up the morning paper.
And I questioned some of these people I said, why is Blessed Sacrament so important to you? Just tell me. I'm asking out of ignorance. I don't know. And they would say, because that's the church that this county legislator would advocate for in that area. Sure. And now, if you take it out of the area, then he doesn't have the church to advocate for. I said, but wouldn't the new guy representing that be a strong advocate? And then he's got a second guy who was also advocate for that area too, who's just got drawn out, who still has an emotional attachment. Now you got two. Isn't that better? And he didn't have
ownership.
Yeah, it
ownership.
is. Yeah.
This is my.
That's right. You're right. Absolutely. What have you been doing since you retired in the Assembly?
Well, I retired January 1st,
Right.
2013, and I had been invited to go on a trip to Turkey with the Turkish Community Center up in Menands with a group. Right. And because of disturbances there on the Syrian border back in the fall, they had canceled it or postponed it. So it was rescheduled to go in May, and it was just a fascinating trip to go through Turkey and to see a different way of life. It's also our image of the Middle East really should be different from community to community and from sect to sect. And I think the Turks want to be known as a modern nation. And we have this image of Sharia law, and we have the treatment of women is something very different. You go to Turkey, and you'll have somebody walk along the street that will have a modified burqa. In other words, their face shows, but they're covered much like a Catholic nun was in my youth. Not too much difference. And the kid next to her will obviously be a relative, a daughter or a niece, who would make Britney Spears look sophisticated, you know, and they're in the same family, and it's like, don't try and figure it out. But above all, don't buy the stereotype.
Well, my thinking of Turkey is Midnight Express, the movie.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, that's what I think of Turkey. I mean, after I saw that movie, I went to Cyprus, and and they cut right through Nicosia, the capital, is the Turk side, and then the Greek side. And I couldn't go to the Turkish side because I might not have been able to be back in, because I would have had a Turkish stamp on my passport. Yeah. So my friends who were Greeks, Cypriots, they didn't want me. Really, they said, you can go, but I'm not going. And I just had this image of Midnight Express that I'd go over there and I wouldn't come back, and I'd have to get a congressman to get me out of jail, or I'd have to break out myself.
Well, we found it generally very open, sophisticated. We went to Istanbul, as they say, instead of Istanbul.
Oh, and they do.
And just went to Ephesus, went to a Roman city from 300, and the antiquity is absolutely incredible. Then we went out.
Any throwbacks to the Old Testament and Judaism in Turkey? And
there's a Jewish community there. There's two countries in Europe who have no substantial anti-Semitism, and one is Turkey.
Really?
Turkey took in all the Sephardic Jews who were driven out in 1491 from Spain.
Okay.
And I remember once, the other one is Ireland, by the way. And
you went to both.
I went to both. Well, the other, that's not a big lift for me. But I remember once there were a group of Turks came for Rotary or the International Center when I worked for Mayor Corning. And the mayor was ill, was in his last year. And they said, could you take them to lunch? So I took them to lunch over in the Empire State Plaza. And they had pictures of their homes. So one is showing me pictures of their homes. And here's a picture of Jesus' mother, because in the Christian tradition, when they left the Holy Land, they went, St. John wound up as her guardian, and they went to Turkey in Ephesus. And from there, in our tradition, she was assumed into heaven. So she's very popular throughout all of Turkey. So here's this very Catholic-looking shrine on the wall. I said, are you Christian? No. I said, this is Mary. Yes. We like Mary. I said, what are you? Muslim, 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 Muslim. And the fifth one said, I'm not Muslim. I'm Jewish. And she was totally in with the group there. And the number of Turks, however, that lived there was cut in half the day that the State of Israel was established. The whole movement back to the Holy Land took about half of the Jews out of Turkey and brought them back. Now Ireland had 10,000 Jews. And you remember we used to watch Herzog would get on there. Did you ever notice the Irish brogue? Yeah, his father was the chief rabbi of Ireland. And he's an Irish citizen, as anybody would be who was born there. But half of the Irish Jews also went to Israel when it became a possibility.
And there were 3 mayors of Dublin, or 2 mayors of Dublin who were Jewish?
The Briscoes in Dublin, but also the mayor of Cork and the mayor of Limerick.
Right.
I think what they had in common, they weren't too thrilled with the English.
Well, I think that the Protestants and the Catholics, they split the vote and the Jews slipped in.
Maybe third party.
It's not Chicago. No, they just don't have some of the nasty traditions that some of the other countries have.
You gave tours of the state capitol.
I still do.
And, well, okay, so you still do. I haven't seen you since you retired.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. What do you enjoy talking about the most about when you're in the state capitol?
It's different from group to group. I like to emphasize the stone carvings.
Right.
And I like to emphasize the personalities of the different architects.
Right. 3 of them.
Well, there's more than that. It starts out with Thomas Fuller, who did the Parliament up in Canada.
Right.
And then there's a national depression, and all the work stops. And they hire 2 people, Henry Hobson Richardson and Leopold Eidlitz. In fact, Eidlitz, who's born in Prague, is probably our first Jewish architect that we know of. And neither one of them were into Victorian, of those 2. So they took Fuller's plans and they made lots of changes in it. But they were very different from one another. Richardson...
He did the Senate side, right?
He did the Senate, he did the court, which is now up by room 250, and he did the $1 million staircase.
Right.
Eidlitz, well, that was Richardson Romanesque,
right.
Like lots of carvings. The front door of City Hall is one of the best things he ever did, because he built City Hall at the same time. The old one burned, they tore it down and built a new one. But Eidlitz had something which was radically different at the time. He called it Moorish Romanticism. And he was inspired by essentially North Africa. Anybody here has ever been to Olana?
Oh, yeah, Olana in Columbia County. Yeah.
Will feel very much at home looking at the Senate staircase. Now, that doesn't come across in the Assembly because they were stuck with much of the outside shell of the walls, so you were going to wind up with rounded windows. So, but there's a prohibition, as you know, in both Islamic and in Jewish tradition, that you don't put graven images, especially of human beings. And so while Richardson is putting faces of everybody from monsters to people to
the children of the carvers.
To the children of the carvers all over. Eidlitz doesn't do that. Eidlitz compromises it. It is the Victorian age, and that he has animals. And he does have some heads that come down inside the pointed arches.
I have so many things to talk to you about, because the last panel of those animals on the Senate staircase, there was a big debate over for like weeks, I think it was, if I'm correct. And they didn't want, it was about evolution. Yes. There was a debate about whether it should be a man at the end, and so they came up, the last panel's a camel. And that was the compromise, the camel. So,
well, there's a lot of urban legends about it. But he does actually put human faces on these knobs that come down. Right. And if it was intended to be the evolution staircase, because it starts with the fish to the amphibians to the birds and the bats that are sort of both, and then these circus animals on top. But where the knobs are, if it's the evolution staircase, he had a sense of humor, because the monkeys are on the same level as the men.
Man, that's right. and on the first floor, in the back of the cafeteria hallway, of course, Satan
The devil's face.
The devil's face
Yes.
is carved in there. And there used to be, when tours came by, they used to do it, they'd flick the bic. They used to flick the bic to see if it would light up and fire would come out of the face. And there was this...
Well, they couldn't see, too. I mean, it's a
that
lot
was the-
easier to get little flashlights.
Right, but it was the other, I like the other story better.
I tell them it was the brimstone.
It was the brimstone. and that clay or whatever, they became dark because of all the fire that
Sure.
So they cleaned it up and they said, no more.
No
but
more.
You really can't. It takes me a little bit of time to actually find it.
And they've looked everywhere for another one.
No,
and it's just that
That's
one.
that one, yeah.
Some people say that the stone carver was told he was going to be fired at the end of the day, or he was in some way disciplined, and that was the evil devil curse that it was being put on the
So I like that. That's my favorite.
I tell them that's why the budget was late.
That's right. So you got to have a sense of humor when you give the tours also.
Oh, you
because
have
it could
to,
be
too.
deadly boring.
Well, you also, whenever you give a tour, you turn the tour around to address to the kinds of people. If you have children, if you have, there's some people who will get very sensitive. My daughter gives tours down there to Maeve, my youngest, and some of them who are very conservative religious don't tell a ghost story.
Right.
They get very insulted by it. And then somebody else wants to hear a ghost story. Some people want to hear political, they don't care about the bill, and they want to hear about the politicians.
Right.
And
Speaking of which, I made a list since 1986 of the legislative bad apples.
Yes.
43 in the Senate and the Assembly. And there was one.
Probably right, but you.
And there was one in 1971, Harold Izzard, who was predecessor to Robin Schimminger. But he was there one term, and
So you figure 43.
yeah,
When I left the Assembly,
and 4 pending, I should say.
I had served with 337 members.
Right.
And I don't know what the turnover in the Senate would be. It's always much higher than people think it is.
Right.
And I would assume if we had double, they'd have double. So let's say, and also people have come in a number since I left in just 2 years. So let's assume there's nearly 500 people that have been senators or assemblymen.
In 20 years.
Okay.
No, in probably 30 years. He went back to what, 86?
25 years.
In 28 years.
No, 28, yeah.
Yeah, so 443 out of
43 out of
or 43 out of 500.
500. It's a big percentage.
Well, I had the exact percentage. I haven't seen your numbers. And when I left, I did the same thing.
Yeah.
It was less than 1%. We had under 10 in the Assembly out of 337.
Oh, no, there's...
I can...
Yeah. We'll compare notes.
I can name them. But see, recently there's been an increase.
We'll compare notes.
You know, Assemblyman, I actually quote you just that same kind of logic, because I remember I went in one time and some crazy thing in New York, someone shot a few people, some crazy, and it was all over the headlines. So I led that, that was the big news story today. I says, it was a crazy thing that happened in New York, and I remember you used kind of the same logic, and I tell people that. This is what Assemblyman McEnany said. Listen, there's 9 million people in Metro New York. There's got to be, in my Jewish land, one Meshuggah, you didn't say Meshuggah, but, one nut. So one nut makes the headlines that he did some crazy thing. So you got to keep, sure, it's the biggest news and everybody's talking about it, it's every headline, but you keep in perspective,
Remember when they got the guy with the man cave that he had set up? And you would think that was your typical state worker, and I would say 250,000 people went to work yesterday. They fed their families, they served their community.
Yeah.
I said, that isn't news. The one guy with the man cave, that's news. And so it's our human nature. We look at all of the failures. News is actually the exception
I have, because we got to wrap up, but I have one thing I want you to talk about, and that's the mezuzah on your door in the office.
Oh, yes.
So could you please quickly just explain
Well,
why you had a mezuzah on your office door?
I had the mezuzah because it was there, and it belonged to Matt Murphy. And Murphy had it because it was there, and it was there when he took over the office from Jerry Kramer. Now, whether Kramer was the Jewish legislator who put it on, or he inherited it from somebody, but a good rule of thumb is when the mezuzah's there, you leave the mezuzah. It wouldn't hurt.
Yeah. Did you in good stead over here. Watched the mezuzah watches over you for 20 years in the assembly. And we just end always with a blessing that you should continue. You're doing good things. You did great things, and for the New York State people. And with good health, and you should keep going and doing the good works that you continue to do.
Thank you so much for taking the time. It was so wonderful to have you here.